All right, so friends, welcome. I'm Peter Bowden. I'm so glad that you're here for this presentation, this live session on social media and membership growth, which is sponsored by the Canadian Unitarian Council, CUC, and my staff contact, Margot Ellis. Thank you for making this happen. She connected with my UU Planet Facebook group for UU leaders, which you're all welcome to join, and ended up inviting me to lead this session. So thank you. So social media is fundamentally changing how people connect, learn, make important decisions, including how they decide to connect with the congregation, decide if they want to join, especially for digitally oriented people. I work with congregations, have for years, and I've been seeing massive shifts in culture, human behavior, thanks to technology, that's really undermining our traditional membership efforts. So we're going to go into how technology is changing human behavior and how that is creating a disconnect between our traditional membership efforts and what we can do about it, and the role of social media. So first, I am a lifelong Unitarian Universalist. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island. My parents were born there. And so I've just been living Unitarian Universalist congregational life my whole life. Married a minister, Amy Friedman, almost became a UU minister myself, but I started doing work with small groups in our congregations, helped promote small group ministry as a model, ministry model nationally. And as I was doing that work with small group ministry, focusing community building, spiritual development, how do we connect people into the lives and hearts of our congregations, and still considering seminary, YouTube came out. And I was doing some work with television at the time, working on PBS Kids projects, which I still do a little bit of from time to time. And we decided, I can do more to help our congregations by figuring out how do we make sense of our changing world and the communication tools of our time than being a second parish minister in the family. Who wants two in the family? I know some of you got that, but we decided not to. So I had no idea how huge social media and technology would be in terms of the power and the impact. So the three main sections of this program today, we're going to look at social media and how there's this new path to membership that people are taking and how our congregations adapt. We'll take some time to look at specific tools, different social media tools like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and just talk through those a bit. I did spend an entire day looking at every single website and every social media channel connected to your congregations in the Canadian Unitarian Council. It was an amazing day! And there's a few little sad moments when I found dead channels and things. Make sure, if you have a Facebook page, make sure it's still active, the one linked to your website. Anyhow, so we'll talk specific tools and how we use them to advance your goals. And then the last part, really look at that gap between our traditional membership efforts and approaches and what digitally oriented people need of us if we're going to support them in successfully connecting with our congregations. So how's that sound in the, if you have any questions, I want to tell you that you can submit questions. We'll have Q&A time at the end. I'm going to do about maybe 40 minutes of presentation, maybe a little less since we started a little late. Technology. And then, but we'll have time for Q&A and further discussion. And so you can submit questions two ways. If you're tuning in, you can use the YouTube player chat that you'll see, and then also on Facebook, right in the webinar room where some of you are viewing this. If you're watching live, there's a place where you can click a button to connect with me via Facebook Messenger through my UU Planet page if you have something you don't want shared publicly. Okay, so when we get to the Q&A time, I'll load up all those chats and review your questions, and then we'll get going. All right, are you guys ready? Yes, that's one thing about not doing it live. I want to hear the cheers, yay! All right, so all right, we're going to dive now into the impact of social media on congregations membership. And I like to anchor my work in really from the perspective of people who would be Unitarian Universalists, who would be members of our congregations, who would love their lives participating in our congregations if they managed to successfully connect with us. And so I work with our congregations nationally, now internationally and beyond. Well, not out in space, but globally, thanks to online training. And I also, I'm trying to be of service to our congregations and our work in the world. But my heart is with the people who would be part of our congregations if we connected successfully, educated them successfully, reached out successfully. And there's a growing gap between what our congregations are doing and what people need, which is breaking my heart. And so here we go. All right. So before social media, if people wanted to connect with a congregation, they would have to go to they'd eventually have to visit. Like they might read about it, hear about it. A friend or someone might invite them. Something in their lives would be a catalyst for their wanting to check out the congregation. So ultimately, even when we first had websites, so pre-social media, but websites, you could read about the church, congregation online, but to get a sense of what the congregation really is about, and if it's right for you, you would have to go in person to connect with the congregation. And so what's happened is now that social media platforms have proliferated, that we now have this amazing media-rich, video-oriented world, there's so much information online about Unitarian Universalism, congregations, individual congregations, and what I'm going to tell you is based on lots of anecdotal evidence as I've been working with people online and visiting congregations for years now, preaching. People are affirming this. And when I guest preach, I'll share things that I'm talking with you about now, and people who are newcomers will come up and affirm this. And people who are connected to me online, because I have one of the largest UU social media presences, people who aren't connected to our congregations communicate with me. So here's what people are experiencing. As they become interested in a congregation, they go through an initial phase of trying to research it. So it's online educational effort. They'll look at the website. They'll look at YouTube videos about Unitarian Universalism. If the congregation has social media channels, they'll check those out. They'll start going through all the available information online, so it's online education, to determine, is this congregation right for me? Is it a match? Will I belong there? And there are a lot of questions that people ask. What's the belief system? What do Unitarian Universalists believe? How do we, handle this, that? What do you do with the children? And all the specific logistics, the time of meetings and whatnot. But very often, congregations will have a certain amount of information on their websites, be sharing social media, sharing inspirational graphics and recordings of this and that. But the people tuning in online, very often, they have a little bit more information that they need to be like, yes, this is a match. I'm all in. Now, from the position of our congregations, they're assuming, hey, if you're curious about our congregation and we've given you the basic info online, website, social media, you're going to come and visit, right? You're going to come and visit, and we'll get to see you, and you'll get to know us, and you'll spend time with us, and you'll get to the point where that, yeah, this is right for you, and we're all getting to know each other, and it's fantastic, right? Right? Well, people who aren't using technology, they'll just go and visit a congregation because that's how they do things. They go in person. People who own smartphones, who use smartphones, who have access to information, instant access information, have been trained to, if they have a question, do instant research and get their question answered. And so there's this impact on our congregations that the culture of having instant access to all the information you need to answer your questions has people online who are curious about your congregation. I'm talking about digitally oriented people. There's a continuum. There'll always be people this is not the case for, but the number of people who are using smartphones and are getting used to social media and all this technology is growing, right? So those people, if they have a question, because there's not all the answers online, because the congregation is expecting to do intro-level education and orientation and community building on site. Well, what do those people do? What do you think happens when someone has, say, you answer all these questions, but they still have like 5 or 6 really important questions. Well, what's the minister or religious leaders like? What exactly do you do with the kids? Et cetera, et cetera. What do you think happens when, put this in the chat, if you're tuning in via the chat, have the chat. What do you think happens when somebody has lingering questions about a congregation? They've never been to a community before, a religious community before. They have a bunch of questions still. Those questions aren't answered on the website. What do you think happens? Throw it in the chat. I'll give you a second. Dun, 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 dun. So, I believe that when their curiosity leads to this immediate exploration and research, for many people, and it's going up, the failure to get their questions answered, leads to anxiety. We're being trained to have all this access to information. If people can't get their answers, then there's a state of anxiety. And many of our congregations are operating from the sense that if there are questions that aren't answered online, the next step is to visit and do more research. Some of the people are saying, all right, they give up. They move on. I'm reading your comments. They move on. They go on to something else. They go away. So I say, this is my little throwaway. Curiosity leads to immediate online research. Instant. Not a long-term thing. It's like a session or so of research right now. If questions aren't answered, in this day and age where we're trained to have access to that information, be able to instantly make a decision, instantly order something on Amazon, instantly purchase this. What movie do we want to watch? We check the reviews, then we rent it and watch it on demand. It's like, it's all happening right now. If I can't get my questions answered, there's anxiety, a loss of control. This is a state I'm not used to. Do I go to the church? No. I go to Netflix. I go to something else. If there's uncertainty, there's so many other opportunities people have. And we have to remember that people are becoming increasingly isolated by technology. There's a growing number of people who are reporting on what's being called a loneliness epidemic. That, well, there's some people, especially in our congregations, our people in our congregations that are connected, well connected with face-to-face communities. But there's a growing number of people who are going to work, doing their work, or maybe they're working isolated, and then they're plugging into entertainment on demand. They're plugging into social media. And so their social experience is very different from what our congregations offer, and there's anxiety. And so one of the major things we need to do if we want to maximize the number of people who we can welcome into our hearts and our lives as Unitarian Universalists, aka grow our congregations, excuse me, is really start looking at what we're doing from their perspective. And so if we accept that, wow, people are digitally oriented, and so if some smartphone using, social media using, entertainment on demand crowd, if they are going to successfully connect with our congregations, we need to accept that their first response to interest in our communities is a desire to do research, to learn, and to affirm, almost like a dating site. Yes, we're a match. We're a match. I don't know if any of you have experience with any dating sites, but imagine, like, here's what I'm looking for. Here's what the congregation is. All right. Is it a match? Yes. Well, then I can move on and go in. Well, what if you have as a congregation, your online portfolio is really horrible with bad pictures and not enough information? People are like, goodbye, out of here. So what do we do about it? So if you think about, what does your congregation do to welcome people into your congregation, to orient them to what Unitarian Universalism is, to answer their questions? So, and in the chat, tell me, if someone new comes to your congregation and makes that first step, they're on site, they go to a worship service or some other event, what do you do to teach them or educate them to, or you say orient them to what Unitarian Universalism is? Do you have newcomer gatherings? Do you have a UU 101 session? Coffee with the minister once a month? What kind of things do you do? Put that in the chat. We'll get back to that in a second as the answers come in. So one thing we need to be doing is, if you look at the traditionally, people would be, all right, if I'm interested in a congregation, I have to go to the congregation, go to worship services, and then there's orientations and educational opportunities that are happening on site, gatherings, FAQ sessions, new member classes, all these things happening on site. And so there's the educational process is happening on site over time, whether it's weeks or months or a year, depending on how often you offer those sessions. And at the same time, and this is important, you listening? You ready? Whether or not people feel that they belong in the congregation, that they feel affirmed, that this people care about me. I like these people. That's just sense of belonging and meaning. That is, I talk about that in terms of being, there's this connecting goal that someone goes to a new congregation. If they're going to stay and ultimately become a member, they have to connect and feel that sense of connection. So there's educational process that's happening. It's been happening on site. All right. So local, you have to come visit, go to worship, and then, or whatever program, and then attend these orientation educational events. That's all been happening on site. And then connecting, building relationships with people, feeling like people care about you, that also happens, right? All that's happening on site. Let's go back to, and so I'm just going to read some of your answers. So here's some of the things that your congregation is doing. UU 101 and coffee with the minister. Minister greets people also at the door. New UU sessions, new youth sessions for Unitarians. UU 101. Greeters and specific members are expected to greet new people, talk to new people, do a lot with greeters. Thanks for sharing those comments. All right, so people previously, the path to membership was, if you're going to end up connecting with the congregation and become a member, you go to the congregation, participate, go through these programs, orientations, you get educated one way or another, and sometimes that can take quite a while, and you get to know people over time and feel a sense of belonging. Educational goals, connecting goals. Now let's move back online. So you're the person who's interested in your congregation. Say, so many people will have a life event trigger interest in connecting with the community. Or they'll be somewhere and they'll see a leader from a congregation at a rally, a protest, out in the public square. Or they go to a wedding or a funeral. Or maybe a friend mentions it. So whatever the catalyst is, that's really interesting. They're not just going to visit, except for, some people will go with friends. If friends take their friends to church, that's different. But a lot of people, digitally oriented, they go online, they do their research. And so there's educational goals they have, connecting goals. I'd say, imagine your path to membership that you have happening on site when people visit. Take the first third to a half of that and assume that now has to happen online for digitally oriented people, increasingly. What does that mean? That means that we still have to do all the stuff that's happening on site, all the stuff on site, because people do come in that way. We have to orient people, educate them, and do community building. But someone who's interested in Unitarian Universalism, if they can't figure out what your congregation is about, maybe some of your history, maybe what are your curricula about, what's happening with the children, all these things, if they can't get enough of their questions addressed to the point where they feel like they have a high degree of confidence that your congregation is right for them, which is the stuff that happens in the new UU sessions, the FAQ sessions, all that intro stuff. If they can't answer that, have that stuff answered, then they tend to either drift away or they go into a passive mode of saying like, well, I'm just going to maybe tune into the podcast, subscribe, like the Facebook page, follow this person on Twitter or Instagram, maybe if you're a congregation or you have leaders there. And in a passive way, they start receiving information.